I'm Allie Diaz.
I'm Anna Dieter.
And I'm Jess Fargo.
And we're doing characterization for In the Field from Things They Carried. After the tragic episode of Kiowa's death, it left the soldiers in grief and exhaustion as each character remains in search for the body. In the chapter, In the Field, the death of Kiowa reveals each of the characters' flaws and traits, along with the contrasting grieving processes which they portray. Jimmy Cross, having the guilty conscience, takes the fault for setting up camp on the grimy mud field. Azar, continuously making ironic jokes, maintains his composure by taking these jokes to hide the sadness of Soldier's death. All the men never gave up hope in the search for Kiowa because, dwelling on the death of a member of the platoon, it was seen as unorthodox. Norman Boker includes everyone for the death of Kiowa, being persistent, found Kiowa. Jimmy Cross proceeded to repeat himself, saying, "My fault," while writing the letter to Kiowa's father. All the while, a young soldier takes the blame harshly for Kiowa's death, because the attack began promptly after the boy turned on the flashlight for Kiowa to see. Azar soon realizes the gravity of the situation and apologizes to Norman Boker for seemingly causing amusement to Kiowa's death. Daydreaming, Jimmy Cross reconsiders and says everyone makes mistakes. Differently than the rest of the characters. At first, Azar tries to cover up his true, deep feelings by making jokes to ease the tension. Azar portrays this act throughout the book. However, his jocular attitude shines through the chapter In the Field. When Azar, Mitchell Sanders, and Norman Boker were searching through the sewage field for Kiowa's body, Azar cracked some jokes that were not appropriate at that time.
Man, talk about irony. I bet if Kyle was here, I bet he'd just laugh. Eating shit. These are classic irony.
The other characters didn't take his comedy too well. Boker even proclaimed to him to stop with the jokes and to zip his mouth. Fortunately, once they find Kiowa's body, Azar's mood changes immediately from comedic to apologetic. The actual sight of death is what bothered Azar, so much he felt bad about his jokes he said earlier. He states,
"Listen, those dumb jokes, I didn't mean anything. When I saw the guy, it made me feel, I don't know, like he was listening."
Every soldier had their own way of dealing with death and covering up depression. Azar's way was cracking immature jokes.
We're going to be analyzing the character of Mitchell Sanders from the chapter In the Field. In this chapter, one of their friends, Kiowa, dies in the mud field because he gets sucked in, and everybody reacts differently. Mitchell Sanders reacts by blaming their lieutenant, Jimmy Cross, on the whole thing, and putting all of the blame for Kiowa's death on him. For example, he talks about how, of all the places that they could have parked camp, he picked the toilet. Or how he should have known, the rain, the mud, he should have just been able to stop it. And instead of following other character traits like Azar, who jokes to try and get over it, Mitchell Sanders shuts him down and tells him to stop, especially when they find the body of Kiowa, and he tries to remind him, "Oh, aren't you going to make another joke? Aren't you going to talk about something like eating shit? Funny, right?" Hey, but Mitchell shuts him down. His character was written in this chapter in this way so that he could portray the one who's not afraid to put the blame down on somebody. While everybody else is too afraid to blatantly say it's his fault, or to blatantly be like, "You need to take the blame for this," Mitchell Sanders was unafraid to let him know that it's his fault. I think that Tim O'Brien wrote this character in because they needed somebody to say that. I will be analyzing one of the characters from the chapter In the Field. Now, there's a young boy, and throughout the chapter he remains nameless, but we know that he feels guilt for the death of Kiowa. He blames himself because, right before the attack, he turned on his flashlight so that Kiowa could see a picture of his girl, Bobby, from back home. And as soon as he did that, the gunshots started firing. And the chapter takes place the day after, in which they're still searching for the body. And while everybody else is along the banks, the young boy stays right in the spot where they were camped out, searching for something. When Jimmy Cross comes over to talk to him, he responds that he's looking for the picture of his girl, Bobby, as opposed to looking for Kiowa, and tries to play it off that he doesn't feel guilty at all, while through our third-person view, we can see that he really does. The way that he deals with it, as he's trying to look for the picture of Bobby and pretending that instead of searching for Kiowa's body, He's going to focus on finding his girl as opposed to focusing on the guilt he really feels and how he blames himself for the death of Kiowa. The author wrote him in this way, maybe because we needed somebody to deal with the guilt but try and hide it at the same time.
Jimmy Cross has a large burden weighed on his shoulders, being the leader of the platoon. His thoughts are consumed constantly by Martha, the girl he loved, but does not love him in return. He learned to block her from his thoughts because he abruptly decides that he must think about the job on the field. He takes the blame of death harshly upon himself and maintains his responsibility as a leader. He often tells himself what he did was a crime. On page 157, if you have your book, Jimmy Cross reflects on the whole situation, saying he made the mistake. But later on page 170, he realized that there are certain times to blame, but in war the causes were immediate, by bad judgment. On the other hand, being a quiet soldier who loathes the pressure of trying to be brave, feels death himself when Kiowa dies, but refuses to give up. He stays persistent and is determined to find Kiowa, continuously shutting out Azar for causing amusement to Kiowa's death. He constantly defends Jimmy Cross because Valkyr includes everyone for the mistake, because his mentality is that when soldiers fight together, they will defend each other, as shown on page 159, saying, "It wasn't the lieutenant's fault." Lastly, for the honorable death of a diligent and brave soldier, the characterization of Kiowa is much more difficult due to the lack of dialogue. However, other characters describe him thoroughly throughout the chapter. Kiowa's entirely submerged body represents how quickly life can be taken away, and this tragedy causes characters to release certain emotions they wouldn't reveal otherwise. Described on page 157, where Jimmy Cross repeatedly says Kiowa was a fine, devoted young man, gives a slight description of who Kiowa was. Kiowa's faith in God was so strong, but he also had a humorous side, which in turn caused his death, involving other cultic factors. Generally, Kiowa died with a strong faith and determined soldiers.